Hey, welcome back to Leave the Rest. I'm Caleb Bridges, and today's topic is fantasy and imagination. And the reason I wanted to make this video is because I think I've just kind of realized how much fairy tales, imagination, and kind of the fantasy world has affected my spiritual walk and my spiritual life, especially as an adult. And I don't know about you, but there's been so many memories for me growing up, even as a child, and I can think of a couple off the top of my head where I experienced times that almost felt magical as a child. You know, one of those was playing in my closet during a rainy day. You know, the darkness and the random objects that if the lights were on, I would have known what they were, but in the darkness, everything had a different meaning. Everything became something wonderful, became a sword, became an animal, became something. You know, that was my imagination just running wild with all these things. I remember playing in my grandparents' attic, and it felt like I was entering a new dimension. You know, and as I was thinking about this, I kind of realized that our imagination really plays a special role in even our relationship with God. And no, I don't mean that we need to sit around and imagine new ideas about God or who He is. That's a bad idea. But what I think imagination allows us to do is it allows us to be able to receive the fact or understand the fact that there's mystery to God. It allows our mind to comprehend the unknowable part of God. Because I think today we really like definitions. We like explanations. And I think we've tried to wrap God up in our neat little theological box. And God is so much beyond that. He's so far beyond that. And I think sometimes what imagination allows us to do is just to embrace the mystery side of God. It allows us to realize that there's this whole side, there's this magical element to who God is. And honestly, I think it's not by chance that the genre of popular movies and books right now, and probably has been for some time, has been fantasy. You know, one obviously huge popular series right now is, and has been for a while, is Harry Potter. And there are people who go crazy over Harry Potter. I mean, it's got its own theme park, movies, people dress up. I mean, and I think something that appeals to so many of us is that somewhere within us is this desire and this longing to experience something more than who we are. Something outside of us. There's this longing for something magical, for something more, for something beyond reality, for something that can exist. Or maybe it can. And no, I don't mean we can somehow become wizards. But I think we can experience some of that longing, because I think, honestly, that longing is for God. You know, there's a really great quote by C.S. Lewis that says that if we find within ourselves a desire that nothing in this world satisfies, then the only logical explanation is that we were created for another world. And I think when C.S. Lewis says we were created for another world, I don't think he necessarily means, well, afterlife, like heaven. What I think he means is that there's almost another world even within our world. There's a spiritual dimension. There's a relationship with God that kills the world, if you will, the world that we're used to, and it opens up a new world to us. You know, I often sometimes also think about Abraham in the Old Testament and kind of how neat it was that he was entertaining angels without even being aware of it. And I think that there's this truth to the fact that there's a lot of things that happen that we don't even see or understand. There's real magic, if you will. Now, obviously, I believe when I say magic, what I'm really referring to is God. But it's still awesome. I think it's still what many of us desire. We might label it, or we might talk about it with regards to potions or wands or other things like that. But I think at the root, it's Him. And it's always Him. It's Him that we long for. But getting back to the fact that I think sometimes we try to wrap God up with these neat little definitions. You know, there's two scripture verses that I want to read. The first one is in Isaiah 55, 8 through 9. It says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, Neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. And then in Job 26:14 it says, Behold, these are but outskirts of his ways, and how small a whisper do we hear of him? But the thunder of his power, who can understand? So we get from these two verses just the magnitude of who God is, the unsearchable qualities of his presence. And that's not to say that we can't understand God at all. We know that he reveals himself to us in many ways. But there's also many sides to God that we can't understand and that we must embrace as mystery. But instead of that bothering us, I think we should celebrate in it. And we should celebrate the fact that part of our longing for him is found in that mystery. And I think sometimes that's what fairy tales allow us to do. I think fairy tales, sometimes they allow us to peer into another world. They allow us to understand a little bit better that desire within us, that awakening of something unknown that we want to know, that we want to experience. And I think that's sometimes what fairy tales can do for us. You know, C.S. Lewis talked about fairy tales, and this is something he said that I thought was really good. He says, it would be much truer to say that fairyland arouses a longing for he knows not what. It stirs and troubles him with a dim sense of something beyond his reach. And far from dulling or emptying the actual world, it gives new dimension of depth. He does not despise real woods because he has read of enchanted woods. The reading makes all real woods a little more enchanted. You know, I think that is a really neat explanation of what fantasy and imagination can do. It doesn't, you know, as he said, you know, it's not that enchanted woods we read about somehow makes real woods less real. It's that we can experience part of that enchantment even in the real woods that we experience in real life. In other words, we're able to take a part of that fantasy or imagination, and it kind of enlivens our heart to be able to embrace the reality of mystery all around us. And I think that that's something that's really cool. You know, I think another thing that's important to understand, especially as we're talking about imagination and the possibility of things happening around us that we're not even aware of, is that so much of what we see is based on the condition of our heart. It's so important to understand that our ability to understand and see reality for what it truly is based on the condition of our heart. It says in John 12:29, Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And then it says the crowd standing there heard it and said that it had thundered. But others said that an angel had spoken. But we know that the disciples knew that it was God. And so I think the really neat thing about this verse is that we're seeing God speak from heaven in three different understandings. Some people hear this loud noise and they just say, oh, it thundered. Other people must have heard words because they said, oh, I think it's an angel speaking. But the disciples knew that it was God speaking. And so it's so important to understand that the condition of our heart determines what we see. You know, I can even say that I see this somewhat in my own spiritual life. You know, as I read my Bible through the years, there's certain verses I've read and they haven't really meant a lot to me. And then a couple years later, they had it was like a great revelation of truth in some way. And I can't help but think the reason for that was just that the condition of my heart had changed, and hopefully in a good way. You know, it also says in Matthew 11:25, at that time Jesus declared, I praise you, Father, excuse me, Lord, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to little children. I think that we should all strive to have hearts like children and minds like adults. Hearts that are ready to receive. Hearts that understand that there's mystery. The humility to be open to the idea that we don't know it all, that we don't understand everything. Because I think it's this humility that it gives us the eyes to be able to perceive things that might be something magical. I think the key is humility, because I think it allows us to peer into something more than what our world is on a regular basis. And maybe, just maybe, we'll get a taste a little bit of that magic. So I hope that this video has been an encouragement in some way to you. I would encourage you to pick up some good quality fiction, not just anything out there is good. Some good authors I would recommend would be G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, obviously, J.R.R. Tolkien, George MacDonald. Those would just be a few of them. So again, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.